Well, the Gold Coast Suns has sacked coach Stuart Dew after a disappointing AFL season. Dew had been contracted for the 2024 season, but Stephen King will take over as coach for the rest of the season. It's believed the club is contractually obliged to pay out 6 months of Dew's salary, worth about $300,000. Dew only won 36 of 121 games while in charge. And joining me for more on this is Herald Sun sports reporter John Ralph. John, thanks so much for your time. I've seen what you've written today on this. Was Stuart Dew sacked because they hope to get Damian Hardwick?
No doubt about that. And I think the Gold Coast would have failed if they can't land Damien Hardwick in the weeks to come. Damien, of course, the triple premiership Richmond coach, who is now overseas for a few weeks, for 7 weeks. There's a bit of plausible deniability here. He's over in Europe. Gold Coast sacks Stuart Dew, of course, his 2004 premiership teammate from nearly 20 years ago. He comes back after getting rested and a little bit of sun on his back at the Trevi Fountain, and then lo and behold, he is the Gold Coast senior coach for 2024. All of it still has to happen. A lot of people are still denying that contact has been made, but unfortunately you don't sack Stuart Dew, who put the club in a reasonable position for another first-time coach. You bring in a superstar of coaching, one that will have significant cachet like Damien Hardwick. It all has to happen still, but I think everyone is lining up, or everything is lining up for that very strong eventuality.
It wasn't Damien Hardwick sick of the game, John. It was all too much for him coaching more seasons, and all of a sudden, you know, a bit of cash, a bit of sun on the Gold Coast, and it could be appealing.
Andrew, what about all those people you've got, friends that are in Bali, or they're in Rome, or they're in Ibiza? They all seem pretty rested after a few weeks over on the continent. No, that's absolutely right. No, he certainly talked about being burnt out. I think what happened was that he looked at his great mate Alistair Clarkson, who, of course, overextended himself, extended his stay at Hawthorn. It was a really nasty and messy farewell for him, which basically saw him ruin his relationships with the club. Of course, the Hawthorn First Nations scandal, a lot of context to that one as well. But I think he really felt like he wanted to get out at the perfect time for Richmond. Felt like his message wasn't being heard. And look, some people said that he should have coached on until the end of the season. He'd been paid to do so. I think the fullness of time in the last 6 weeks has shown it was the perfect timing for him. So my understanding is that after a couple of weeks out at Richmond, he was already climbing up the walls. You know, he was bored. He was ready to throw himself back in. He's very keen to coach next year. Yeah, there are some people who were associated with him who would say that he was burnt out, and they wonder whether he's ready to coach next year. But look, I think he's very keen to do so. I think the AFL would probably kick in, essentially some as well as an ambassadorial fund. He would be highly paid. And I think it's the perfect time for him with 3 adult children. He has broken up with his wife and he has a new partner, Alex, a former staffer at Richmond. And I think there are ways in which that they would like to get out of the fishbowl of Victoria. I think it's a perfect spot for Damien, who even a couple of weeks ago on a podcast was just exclaiming the virtues of the Gold Coast Sun. I think all of it ticks the right box for Damien Hardwick. And again, at an elite list that's about to bring in 3 top 10 draft picks from their academy program. 37 years the Richmond drought was broken with Damien in charge in 2017. This is a Gold Coast team that only has an 11-year finals drought. Of course, have never played finals in their short history. I think Damien is the man to get them back to, or get them to that drought-breaking experience as a September participant.
Has Stuart Dew been hard done by, do you think?
Yeah, he really has. Yeah, I mean, this would have been a line ball decision. I think if you'd asked 3 or 4 weeks back when Gold Coast were 7-7 and playing quite well without their star captain in Tuke Miller, you'd say, yeah, he's doing a reasonable job. I think the nature of his sacking as well has been pretty diabolical. If you're an AFL coach and you're going to get sacked, you want it to be one of 2 ways. Your team is so miserable, you're almost relieved to be sacked, get your payout and go overseas on holiday, or brutally, swiftly. You never saw it coming, and the club sacks you, and they move on really swiftly. This was 8 days of sort of slow torture, to be honest. So reports around last Monday that he was to be sacked. He came out and strongly denied it on Tuesday. The full support of the board, which is always the poison challenge on Wednesday. Yeah. Had a really fighting performance against Port Adelaide, who won 14 in a row. And then, of course, last night the board made that decision. I think in the fullness of time, if they can deliver a senior premiership coach like Damien Hardwick, it will be the right decision. But you give the decision itself an 8 out of 10 and the execution of it probably 1 at best out of 10.
John, just finally, these expansion teams, Gold Coast and to a lesser extent GWS, have been a bit of a disappointment for the AFL, haven't they? They haven't got the crowds. They haven't got the support. Does this bode badly for an expansion to Tasmania?
I don't necessarily think so. GWS, at their best, when they were winning, they were drawing crowds. I think the message from the expansion clubs is that there aren't rusted on fans. There are certainly fans who, let's call them downhill skiers. They flock to these stadiums when the teams are up and about and when they're playing finals, as GWS did, and of course got so close in 2019 with a beaten grand final performance. I would hope that Tasmania, and I know that Tasmania has that rusted on fandom. We saw, of course, the State of Origin game on the weekend. 8,000 fans came out in force. It is a football stronghold. They've been so desperate for so many years for football, and so they're not that interested in North Melbourne or even Hawthorn playing down there. But I think when Tasmania gets their own team, Andrew, I think they will come out, and they will come out in spades to support this 19th AFL franchise.
John Ralph, thanks so much for your time this afternoon.
A pleasure.